Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the NTC podcast. No trade clause coming back at you. One half of the team is on hand, back with episode 5 of this podcast. Oliver and Anil are here to join me to help break down the 4 teams that were part of the play-in tournament just last week that were eliminated. So now they've shifted their focus to the offseason. So we want to really look at what they're going to prioritize going into free agency, some roster decisions they're going to have to make, their cap space, things of that nature. And then we want to just follow that up with some of these first-round series. We just got done watching Knicks and Hawks. That's a very riveting and competitive series, so we definitely want to touch on that one. There's a few other series going on, but to really kind of focus this in for you guys, we want to focus on 4 of the most competitive playoff series for the first round currently that we're watching and some things we kind of picked up on. So, basically, we're just kind of doing like a playoff kind of summary here for you guys / play-in. Just to kind of keep things simple and get back up to speed. It's been a few weeks since we've been on, and things have kind of shifted in the NBA landscape. But we're really excited about how the playoffs are going, so we really want to take a look at that. So for you guys so far, Anil and Oliver, with this playoff run, like what has been one of your takeaways from this? I mean, I know there's a lot we can talk about. I know the fans has been a huge development, especially with the Knicks atmosphere. It's been really cool to see the fans back in the stands. And I think it makes a huge difference on the home team and how competitive they are, having that home court advantage back. So how are you guys feeling about the playoffs just a few days into the action here?
For me, I think this is one of the best playoffs that I've seen so far. Every series, aside from Philly, Washington, Boston, New York, Boston, Brooklyn, every other series feels like any team can win. Every series in the West, like you thought that Utah would probably make quick work of Memphis, and then Memphis wins game 1. The other 3 series are all tied at 1. If Chris Paul doesn't get hurt, like Phoenix would probably be putting LA in some big trouble. Actually, the Clippers are down 2-0, but it doesn't even feel like it's 2-0. It feels like it's 1-1 because you can't believe that Dallas is up 2-0. So like every series is like so engaging, and I feel as well like obviously Brooklyn is a favorite, but because we haven't seen them do it in the way that we had seen Golden State do it in the past, and because Brooklyn's had their health issues this year, it doesn't feel like there's like a runaway favorite that like there was in previous years. When Golden State had their dynasty, and when the Miami Heat were the big 3. This year feels like it's anybody's guess. Like who's gonna come out of the West, for example? Like so many teams, you could make a case for almost any team. For me, one of the big takeaways is Luka Doncic has officially arrived to me.
He's different.
He is like he was already in like the MVP discussion, but kind of like on the outskirts of it. And it was always like, Luka's coming. He's coming. I think Luka's here, and I think he's making a case. And I think for next year, I think he's going to already be the early MVP favorite, because in my eyes, the MVP discussion or like the campaign actually starts in the playoffs the year before. It's the reason that Giannis wasn't the discussion all year this year, because last year's playoffs, well, they flamed out. Luka is making a name for himself. If he beats the Clippers, not only does it take him to the next level, but what the hell does it do to the Clippers? Kawhi's got this player option. The team is stuck because they paid all this money to Marcus Morris and Luke Kennard, who hasn't played any time. And it's like you got 0 minutes. You paid this guy $60 million. So what happens to the Clippers? Like that team has all the pressure in the world. To me, that is one of the most exciting series. But I'm loving this playoff so far.
Yeah, Anil pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. I was also had written down that all the series so far have been very competitive and surprising, or I guess not necessarily surprising, but we expected it to be competitive, and it has lived up to that potential. And I think a lot of the reason why we came into the playoffs with those expectations is because of the play-in tournament. A lot of these teams, like Memphis, for example, like they've been in playoff mode for probably the past month. They have been locked in. They've set their goals, and then they've met them so far. Now, my one question moving forward is, let's say, Memphis completely defies the odds. They get the upset versus Utah. Do you see a team like Memphis burning out, in the next series or the one following that? Because, as I said, they've been in this playoff mode for so long, and they could run out of gas sooner than some of the other teams that, were able to take the end of the regular season a little lighter than others. So that's something I think to keep an eye on moving forward. How much gas do these play-in teams have left in the tank?
That's a really good question, Oliver. And I want to put out one player that really kind of demonstrates that kind of passion and energy he exerts every single night. Watch Dylan Brooks any given game and watch what he does on both ends of the court. I mean, he's out here giving his all on defense, D'ing up the best perimeter option for the other team, and he's running around like a madman on offense in transition, attacking the rim, throwing up his patented shots. That guy is giving everything, and you can see the passion in his game. That whole Grizzlies team, they came to play, and they're really exhibiting that kind of the characteristics you would see in a veteran team, which is really cool to see because they're one of the youngest teams in the association. So definitely want to keep an eye on them. And even though we're not going to be able to touch on them tonight, I mean, like you guys have said, I mean, there's so many teams across the league that are compelling, and they have their own cases as to why they should be looked at as potentially moving on in the playoffs and making a deep run. But moving on to our initial discussion here, it's going to be the play-in games. So these teams did not quite make the playoffs as a result of the play-in, but they did have a great run, and their off seasons are going to be very interesting to watch for a variety of reasons. So the first team we're going to look at here, guys, is the Warriors. I mean, obviously, this is a team that they were on the cusp. They almost made it. I mean, they were LeBron James maybe dagger away from making the actual playoffs. And, the first guy you got to look at when you're determining your future, it rides on Curry. I mean, he is this organization. He has been for quite some time. And I pulled a graphic from Bobby Marks' post on Twitter, and it basically laid out what an extension could look like for Steph Curry going forward. So, I mean, that deal would start at $48 million. Of course, he still has a couple years on this deal, but you can extend him and add some years to this contract. I mean, that he'd be looking at another $200 million contract if that were to be the case. So the thing I want to think about here with this guy is like, do they really want to do this right now? I know that, Curry is already getting into his mid-30s here. The team is kind of at a crossroads. You're not quite sure how good they're going to be next year with Clay kind of still kind of in limbo with his injury. That's a lot of money to tack on to your future, especially if this team is going to be in decline in the coming years, depending on what happens with these guys. So, if we're going to put our GM hats here on for a second and think about whether you want to extend this guy, on one hand, it's almost like you have to because of what he means to this organization. But on the other hand, your luxury tax payments are already going to be sky high for the next couple of years. So do you want to add that kind of obligation to your books? How are you guys operating in that situation when it comes to Steph Curry? Do you really want to make that deal now, or do you want to kind of wait it out maybe another season and see how he plays and maybe just prove that he's not in decline as he reaches ages 33, 34 and beyond?
So for me, I think you have to try to get Curry the extension this offseason. And the main reason is because if you don't, he's a free agent next season or next offseason. Mm-hmm. And you probably don't want to have that. You don't want to risk losing him. There's already rumors of LeBron James kind of in the back, campaigning to get Steph on the Lakers. There was a quote where he said, "Yeah, Steph Curry, he was the MVP for me." A little bit of campaigning in the background, whether or not that has any substance to it. I mean, I don't see Steph leaving Golden State based on what's happened so far in his career. Why would you leave? And I think that he's worth every penny. Obviously, they're deep into the luxury tax, but that's not the area where you probably want to try to save money. He's worth every penny so far on the court. He's worth every penny so far off the court. And they have a new expensive arena. They moved from Oakland to San Francisco. And since they got it, they lost Kevin Durant. Klay Thompson's been down. COVID hit. They haven't had a single playoff game for a sellout crowd. They're probably itching to do that. And if you get rid of Curry, then you're basically saying it's rebuild time. So I don't think you can risk it. I think you've got to give him the extension just to lock him in.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to sound like a broken record. I hope I can disagree with Anil at some point during this podcast, but I do agree with Anil again. I do like the idea of extending Steph Curry in the offseason. The Warriors have, with Klay coming back and what they have going for them this offseason, they've got the pieces to retool as a championship roster. They're going to have they could potentially have 2 lottery picks. It's likely that they will have 2 lottery picks, and then they will have the draft assets in terms of some larger contracts that they could move, or excuse me, the trade assets to move some larger contracts to salary match, get some veterans in to bolster that second unit, and also we still have to put it into context that he's 5 years or so removed from his MVP seasons, and he's putting up similar numbers this season than what he did when he won that award. So I don't see any indication of him slowing down. And even if he does slow down, he's the gravitational pull that he has on defenses will still be there because his bread and butter is off-ball movement. And even though he may decline in his mobility and his ability to run around the court in circles, teams are still going to have to know at all times where he is on the court and are going to have to keep a guy by him because, your shot doesn't really age with the rest of your body in terms of your athleticism, your mobility. That jump shot, I think, will be there for pretty much the duration of his career. So I'm with extending him. I think that, as Anil said, it'll bring some excitement to the organization, reinvigorate the fans, and hopefully prolong the window of opportunity that the Warriors have.
Yeah, and Oliver, you touched on the kind of the cast that they have in Golden State that's around Curry. They still have pieces, and we haven't even been talking about Klay Thompson yet. He's one of those guys that you inject into this team, you automatically raise that ceiling just a couple notches because he has similar gravity to Curry, especially when he's off ball. You can't lose track of him. So it's definitely somebody that, is also on a max contract that they can rely on coming back next year, hopefully being somewhere near his normal self. We'll have to see how that goes as he kind of works his way back into game shape. But, even at 80% of what he was before, Klay Thompson is an extremely dangerous player, perimeter player for them. So we can't forget about him. And then I would look at Kelly Oubre as well. Kelly Oubre's free agency is going to be fascinating. His last deal came a couple years ago. Phoenix gave him 2 years and a $30 million deal. 15 per, is perfectly suitable for a role player like Kelly Oubre. Now, the market for him is going to be interesting because this past season, he had his struggles. He really went up and down, especially when it came from a shooting perspective. I'm sure you guys remember at the beginning of the season with Kelly Oubre, people were saying he hasn't made a jump shot yet, or he's 2 for 16 or whatever. And, he's missing dunks out here. His confidence was shot through the first couple weeks. So that was kind of a yikes moment for him. But he started getting going again later in the season. And he got shut down, unfortunately, a few weeks before the play-in games with another injury. But, nonetheless, he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. And, Golden State is going to need some perimeter players to kind of flank Curry and Klay. So, once you look past a guy like Wiggins, Oubre is going to be another guy you have to look at bringing back. And I'm curious to see, what Golden State what kind of price tag they put on him. I'm sure they want to bring him back. I think if you're looking at him as borderline starter, or maybe he comes off the bench once Klay is back, that's another a possibility for them. But either way, I think they should definitely take a look at that. If it's you guys' decision, is Oubre really, are you on the similar train of thought as to bringing him back? I know it's going to be, their tax situation is just rough. I just really hate that for them having to navigate that. But you really have to extend this window of opportunity having Curry there as long as you can. And I think Oubre is going to be a great way to do that. And I'm sure that you're not going to be able to replace him with somebody on the open market with the limited resources you have if you depart from Oubre. So, I'm thinking that they bring him back. I'm not sure what the price looks like yet, but I'm sure he'll be better next year because I don't think he can start a season as bad as he did for 2 seasons in a row. I think he's too good to have that kind of season again. He should be okay going forward. So curious to see what you guys might think about that.
Yeah, so I can definitely see Kelly getting similar money to what he's had for the past season. I know his numbers were down and things were kind of back and forth, but just the way he ended up in Golden State just kind of seemed off to me. Like, I mean, it just seemed weird. Like Clay went down and I could just imagine like the Warriors front office scrambling, like looking at who's left on the free agent board. Like, okay, what do we need to fill this position? Like we need a guy on the wing. Then they just kind of threw a dart at the board and were like, Kelly Oubre. It just didn't seem like a great fit to me. It seemed very, like I said, plug and play. And he was brought into a new team, new environment. He also I remember reading he battled, some off the court issues throughout the year. So he may not have been in the right headspace to perform in a new environment. I could see a small market team going after him in free agency to kind of pitch him a new environment, a new culture, somewhere where Kelly may have more freedom to kind of do what he wants, have the ball in his hands more and still be able to get that same money. Because like I said, if you're Kelly's agent, who's actually, interestingly enough, Tobias Harris's father, you could just pitch the fact that, he wasn't in the right headspace. Golden State might not have been the best fit for him. He's a very creative player and a guy who can do a lot with the ball in his hands. And, there are a lot of mouths to feed, as we've already touched on in Golden State. So I think if you give him a little more opportunity, maybe with a smaller market, he can thrive.
For sure.
Yeah, so obviously at the beginning of the season, struggled mightily. First 8 games, he shot 6 of 42 from 3, which is 14%. He ended up finished the season at 31% from 3. So he picked it up, but that was a lasting impression because it was like epically bad. I think it was like the worst stretch to start for a shooter that had shot that many threes. But for me, I don't think that the Warriors will look to retain him for a couple of reasons. One, if they cut him, there'll still be $9 million over the tax without his salary. With his salary, they'll be much further over the tax. This year, their tax bill was enormous, but he was a fill-in for Klay Thompson. That was the reason that they needed him. But I don't think that they'll need him in the same way. Also, the growth of like Juan Toscano, he'll probably get some more minutes next season. And also the potential for them to get Minnesota's pick this year. We'll see how that plays out. If they get Minnesota's pick, that might fill that void. And also, obviously, the return of Klay Thompson. We'll see. But I think that Golden State will try to get under the luxury tax because they're a repeat tax team. So the tax bill just keeps increasing. Kelly Oubre also, he'll be 26 in December. This will be his 7th year. I'm pretty sure like what he's being given is what you're going to get. You can't kind of expect much more growth because he's been pretty steady for the last couple of years. And I could definitely see a contender, paying him. But I think that his salary range will dip. He was around 15 million. I think that'll dip to probably the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception around 9.5. That's my personal guess. Unless he goes to a team that's got a bunch of money. There is a bunch of money flying around this offseason. So he could definitely get paid if some of the teams with a lot of money don't find a home for it. And then going back to your other point about Klay Thompson, he's going to have come off a torn ACL, torn Achilles, 2 of the worst injuries you can have in basketball. So he could be a shell of himself. Like in terms of on offense, he could still be like, I don't know, maybe 80% of himself if he's lucky. But I think he'll really be impacted on defense. The lateral movement, I don't know if it's going to be the same. And the other day, GM Bob Myers, he said that they don't know if he's going to be ready for the start of next season. That's not a great sign.
No, it's not.
We'll see. But Golden State, they had such amazing run of health the first 4 seasons of their run, and then everything started just falling apart, and it just seems like everything's unfortunately caught up to them. Hopefully we get him back, because that Golden State team was fun to watch even without him this year. But we'll see.
Yeah, and the great thing about this team, I think, what we have to keep in mind is that they had some players like you just mentioned, Anil, Juan Toscano-Anderson, Michael Mulder, Damian Lee. I mean, these guys, Jordan Poole. I mean, they definitely had some good campaigns. So I think that gives the Warriors a little bit more, kind of flexibility when it comes to who they're going to bring back, who they're going to keep on this team. Because if you have those young guys at a discount, they can fill some of those voids that might be left behind by some of the more established players. So that's definitely going to be something to keep in mind when it comes to their future. Another team that was in the Western Conference play-in that didn't quite make the playoffs, San Antonio, was in a similar position. They just couldn't get it done against Memphis. As we stated before, Memphis is on a mission. I mean, they're just out there just grinding right now. But with the Spurs, I mean, there's definitely some questions with this team. I mean, this is their second straight missed playoff season after, the internal stretch that they had in the playoffs. So it's a little bit of a weird era for them, and they're definitely at a crossroads. LaMarcus Aldridge moved on this season. That was a buyout situation. Popovich is definitely getting to the twilight of his career. Not quite sure how much longer he's going to be a coach there. And then you have a guy like DeMar DeRozan hitting free agency, which is going to be very vital for them because he's been a major cog for this team for a few years now, ever since he came from Toronto. So I'm really looking at how they're going to spend this cap space that they're going to have available to them. I mean, they can, have upwards of 50 million available to them. So they're definitely going to have some money to play with this offseason. So I'm curious to see if they dump some of that money back into DeRozan, bringing him back, or they shift gears and they want to maybe stay younger, find somebody with a little more upside, and kind of go that route. So it's definitely going to be a tale of two potential paths for San Antonio when it comes to their offseason. So, Oliver, if you're looking at what they could do to shore up this roster and really give themselves a chance of making the playoffs for next season, I mean, what should they address first of all? DeRozan was a great player, but is it worth bringing him back if he's going to be back at, 25 million a season or whatever the case is? How important is he for the long-term potential of this team?
I would like to see DeMar DeRozan back in San Antonio. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if they have his bird rights, they can hopefully pay a little more to retain him. And San Antonio has a really young core, very solid young core. Specifically, Jakob Poeltl, I think, had a great season that kind of flew under the radar. DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker, they're kind of, progressing through their development at a solid rate. And, they could still go out, get another young guy. And, even they should still have money to be able to play with at the end after all of that, after taking all these young guys through another off season of development, bringing back DeMar. San Antonio has always been about continuity. You don't hear their name during the trade deadline very often. There's never really a whole lot of buzz about them in the media. They just move quietly, go about their business, and like I said, are about continuity. So I think that's the culture they have. That's their bread and butter. So I'd want them to stick to that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm going to go in a different direction. I kind of don't think that it makes a ton of sense for them to retain DeRozan, just because I'm thinking, what's their goal? Is their goal to be like a fringe playoff team? And when we say fringe, really fringe play-in team, you have to assume that the Pelicans will improve. Sacramento is trying to improve. So where does that leave the Spurs? DeRozan's 32 years old at the start of next season, so he's not super old, but he's 5 to 6 years older than the rest of the core of the team. DeJounte Murray's 25. Derek White's going to be I'm talking age to start next season. DeJounte Murray will be 25. Derek White, 27. Poeltl, 26. Lonnie Walker, 23. So DeRozan's in a bit of a different gap to those players in my mind. To me, I'm thinking you need growth from your young players. invest in that core, let DeRozan kind of move on, because I think DeRozan will still demand $20 to $25 million. I mean, if DeRozan wants to come back for one season, okay, fine, doesn't hurt. But what's the Spurs' end goal? I don't think it's to be just a fringe play-in team, and if that's not the case, I think that they should instead try to use that money and invest in some other talent that might be available.
But if not DeRozan, then who though? Because I think if you look at the rest of the free agent market, do you see a person in there that you feel like could take them over the hump?
So some of the players that come to mind that I'm thinking, you know what, they'd be better off paying this person. One person's name that comes to mind is like Norman Powell. Instead of giving 20 plus million to DeRozan, maybe give 20 million to Norman Powell, who's younger, probably on the upside of his career, on the better side of 30. John Collins, he'll be a restricted free agent, of course, but maybe you make a swing at him. Those would be probably two of the names that pop to mind. And maybe you go after like a Lauri Markkanen, depending on what his market looks like. I just don't think that, for me, I'm thinking DeRozan doesn't align in the long term with where the Spurs want to be in a couple of years. When they're finally ready to turn the corner and say, now it's our time, is DeRozan in that picture or not in that picture? To me, I don't think he's in that picture. So it doesn't make sense to continue to invest in him from my perspective.
Those are both really good points, guys. I mean, on one hand, you definitely want to have, a roster that kind of fits together, and you don't want to have guys kind of past, their expiration date, so to speak. But at the same time, I think it's really good that, a guy like DeRozan was there to kind of steady the ship. I think we forget sometimes that at one point, this team was in the thick of the playoff race. They were 22-16, just going back to their schedule on March 19th. So it was pretty late in the season. They were doing pretty well. So I think there's still definitely some potential to explore with this team, whether or not DeRozan's there. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back, honestly, especially if it's only for maybe 2 years. Maybe they do maybe they do an option at the second year, make a player option or something like that. There's definitely opportunities to be explored. And I think since they have that cap space at their disposal, they have options. They have flexibility, and they can bring him back while still maintaining space to do something else. So that's a fascinating situation for sure. And it definitely lets us know that the Spurs are definitely in kind of like, they're kind of going through a transitional phase right now. And whether that results in another play-in or a playoff appearance, it's yet to be seen. It all really depends on what they prioritize. And like you said, Anil, like, what is their goal? What are they trying to achieve? Do they want to just go for it, or do they want to kind of slowly kind of move this thing along? Another team that really just kind of pushed the boundaries of what they're capable of, and that's kind of like they're also in a transitional phase. I would say the Charlotte kind of falls into that category as well. LaMelo's ball debut has been electric, possible rookie of the year. Let's start with this question on this one, guys. We filled out a ballot. We all kind of did like a little survey for our rookie of the year. Did either of you guys pick LaMelo Ball as rookie of the year? Spoiler, I did. I think he still had enough in the tank, even though that, he missed a lot of games in the campaign. But did you guys select LaMelo Ball, or did you kind of give the nod to Anthony Edwards for your rookie of the year pick? Anil, what you got?
I went with LaMelo. To me, he was just such a difference maker. Anthony Edwards was impressive for sure, but he came on late, and I feel like the narrative was already established that it was such a surprise what LaMelo was able to do with the Hornets. So he not only elevated his own profile, but the whole team's profile. And I think that was too tough for Anthony Edwards to compete with.
I feel that.
Yeah, so I actually picked Anthony Edwards. I just felt like his impact on the organization this season, I think, was huge, and I just felt like they have a really bright future around him specifically. And I don't know, the play-in. I'm not gonna lie, watching that play-in tournament or play-in game with Charlotte, like, that impacted my choice. Charlotte definitely dropped the ball, and if he had done well in that game, if the Hornets had done well in that game, maybe I'd think differently. But yeah, I watched that game and I was like, I gotta give it to this other guy. So
I'm pretty sure the official ballot is done like the last night of the regular season. I think that's when it's due before the play-in game. But you're right.
Mm-hmm.
If it could be submitted after, I think that would have changed some minds because they looked as bad as you could look.
Oh yeah, they were absolutely awful. So that kind of begs the question going forward, like how do you build around this guy? Like if you're going to have a team that really prioritizes LaMelo Ball as kind of like the tip of the spear, how do you go about finding the players that really complement him the best? This is a guy that's a great playmaker. He's very creative. He has a bunch of skills in his bag already at a young age. I think we could be looking at, almost like someone like Luka comes to mind as somebody that's just, a big guard. Passing skills are out of this world. He has some shades of a good 3-point shot. I think he was about league average or somewhere around there as far as his 3-point percentage. I would definitely go and look at guys that can finish plays. So if LaMelo is going to put guys in position to succeed, I definitely want a A1 rim roller on that team. I want some great spot up shooting, some guys that are great off-ball movers. I think Terry Rozier is a great start with that, a guy that can be electric and kind of play off of him a little bit in the backcourt. But when it comes to the center position, I think they do need to upgrade that. Cody Zeller is a free agent. I will look at kind of making an upgrade in that area. Biyombo is okay, but those are some of the questions I have when it really comes to building around Ball. So how would you guys go about doing that? I mean, the center position, any names in mind if it comes to like how they're going to find somebody that complements Ball? I mean, if they could do something similar to what Atlanta did with Capella, finding a guy that messaged so well in the pick and roll, I think that would be incredible for him. But definitely some options. And I think this is going to be an exciting offseason because they have a vision and they finally have a clear idea of what they can be, if all things are running kind of full speed for them.
So I'll take the first stab, but I think they should kind of model what New York did this offseason. They kind of go center by committee a little bit, between Nerlens Noel, Taj Gibson, since Mitchell Robinson has been out at least. And that formula has been working really effective for them so far. Like they're very solid veterans who have a strong presence on the court, are able to kind of act as a floor general, if you will, be a strong leader. And, that's what a rookie or a young player needs is, a strong vet running with them. And if that person happens to be a center who's rolling to the basket, taking up space every play, then even better.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't necessarily one name I have in mind, but if you can find those value players in free agency, those value big men, a guy like Taj Gibson, a guy like Nerlens Noel, both who I think will be free agents this coming off season, then I think that is their best move considering what the current free agent market looks like for big men. I think it is pretty dry relative to some other positions. So that's how I would attack that.
So from my perspective, I think two names that could potentially be on their board would be Rashawn Holmes, who's an unrestricted free agent out of Sacramento. He could be a nice addition. And then the other name, which he doesn't look like a free agent right now because New York has a team option for Mitchell Robinson. But if New York opts into the team option, the next season Mitchell Robinson becomes a free agent. Unrestricted free agent. But if New York opts out of the team option, then they can make him a restricted free agent this season and then lock him up for longer. So I kind of think that New York may actually opt out of the team option so that they can lock Mitchell Robinson into a little bit of a longer deal. If that happens, though, then teams are open to negotiate with Mitchell Robinson. And we've seen Charlotte knows their position in the market, which is we have to overpay if we like a guy. They did it with Gordon Hayward. Yep. They would probably do the same if they really like a player like a Mitchell Robinson. But those are two players that could be a good fit and an upgrade for Charlotte.
Yeah, then I'm glad you touched on Gordon Hayward, Anil, because I think this season is definitely a sign of some of the concerns I had personally with that kind of deal. I mean, there's no debating that he's a great player and, he's, almost worth that money if he's full health and he's contributing at an all-star level. But as we saw, he wasn't available for the play-in. He missed several weeks at the end of the season. He wasn't able to close the season. this has got to be like the third year in a row he's had some kind of major injury during the season that kind of put him out. So I'd be really worried about this deal long term if he can't stay healthy. I mean, you're paying him with that kind of stretched deal for Batum. I mean, like we mentioned before, $40 million a season upwards. So it's just concerning for me if you're going to invest that kind of money in a guy that's not going to be playing for you, especially when it matters the most. And, if he played in the beginning of the season, or he missed the beginning of the season and he played late, I mean, okay, but like if you're going to miss the games that are really kind of define their season, like playing games, it just worries me a little bit. So not quite sure how that's going to go, but concerning to say the least.
So I just wanted to say one thing about the Gordon Hayward situation. So they overpaid. They gave him a long contract. They gave him a 4-year contract. I think he did help contribute to winning. He's always injured, which isn't great. Celtics obviously missed him as well. So you can kind of see the positive impact that he had on Charlotte, the negative impact that it had on Boston by him leaving. My problem actually isn't the amount of money that he got, but the amount of years that they gave him. Because what happens is after this season, Gordon Hayward has 3 more seasons left, and he falls off right when LaMelo's extension will kick in. There's no year in between where it's a bit of a gap. So you go straight from paying Gordon Hayward $30 million to LaMelo's cap hold is going to be something like $30 million. If it finished just 1 year earlier, it would have given them cap space the year before LaMelo's extension kicked in, and then they could use that money to go and try to get some sort of star player to combine with LaMelo, and then exceed the cap next year when you have LaMelo's bird rights and sign him to a rookie extension. But the way that they kind of lined it up is we're paying Gordon Hayward right until LaMelo's extension, and then once Hayward's off the books, well, we got LaMelo's massive extension that's going to kick in. So they messed up to me by giving him one too many years.
Yeah, that's a good analysis, and it's a valid concern with this deal. But that's the game you play if you're Charlotte. You're a small market. You have to roll the dice, and sometimes you kind of get burned on those type of investments. But one last team here that came up short in the play-in is Indiana, and their offseason is I'm kind of back and forth on this one. I love Sabonis. I love Brogdon. I think LeVert was an excellent pickup for them. He had his great moments in the offseason or this regular season, but I'm not quite sure what the ceiling looks like for this team. I think even if everybody's fully healthy, maybe they're a 5 or 6 seed. If they can really just keep everybody on deck, Brogdon, if Turner is healthy, all those guys, I'm not quite sure kind of where they go from here. Their head coach, Bjorken, already on the hot seat. It's kind of crazy to me that, a brand new head coach is already, on the hot seat here, and he's at risk of losing his job. And it just kind of goes to show how kind of badly this campaign went for them. But that's kind of the question I have here. And then I'm thinking about the front court. So Sabonis and Turner, it's been talked about at length for years, but can these guys really coexist with each other? Does somebody get traded? I doubt it's Sabonis. I mean, maybe Turner could be moved. He's been in rumors already, rumored to potentially go to Boston last offseason. So, the Pacers are kind of cut and dry right now. I think they give it another shot. I think you should at least keep the coach, keep the core, retool around the team, and give it another chance because there were a lot of injuries this regular season. And I think you owe it to this core and the investment you made in that coach to at least give it another shot to see if you can kind of claw your way up to a middle of the tier, middle of the road playoff team seed, and then possibly make a small run to maybe get out of the first round. So that's kind of where I'm at with them. Not too much else to analyze, honestly, I think. But that's kind of where they're at. They just kind of ride the wave and see where it goes. How do you guys feel, Oliver? And are you kind of in the same boat, or any differences from your end?
Yeah, I think they should let Bjorken go this offseason. I think there's very clearly, normally, you kind of hear murmurs among team beat reporters that there's tension in the locker room. There's this, there's that. It kind of flies under the radar because obviously that kind of stuff typically stays in-house. But with the Pacers this year, it was just so obvious you could cut that tension with a knife. You saw assistant coaches and players getting into it. Like, that's something I've never seen before. And it was so visible. And, there were a bunch of players that were injured this year, and it kind of made me question, like, I wonder, if these players that are currently out, if they're a little less motivated to come back to the situation, given what the current state of the locker room is like. Maybe they're taking their rehab, their recovery a little lighter, just so, they could get prepped for the following season and not kind of have to get back in the trenches with the rest of the team right away, because the Pacers also dealt with injury last season, and they were in the playoffs and they were competitive and during their stint in the playoffs. So I think because a lot of people have kind of, talked about the injury bug again for Indiana, but in my opinion, I think that's a bit of a scapegoat for in this situation. I think the Pacers need to start back at a clean slate and hopefully, get someone who can build a culture that, the rest of the players can buy into, because it really seems like it got to a point during the season where he lost the reins.
So, obviously the Nate Bjorken situation it seemed like a real disaster. At the end of the Raptors season, because obviously Nate Bjorken came from Toronto as an assistant coach under Nick Nurse. Mm-hmm. Fred VanVleet was on the broadcast. I think it was the last game of the season, and he was doing color commentating, and he was actually saying how he had spoken to some of the Pacers players, and they said that the story was BS. Now, obviously, he would stick up for Nate because they probably have a good relationship based on their years. But I thought that was interesting. So I wonder, like, to Oliver's point about like the assistant coach getting into it with one of their players. It didn't look like a good situation, but I don't know, maybe it was blown out of proportion more than it was in reality. He has 2 more seasons. I think next year is fully guaranteed. So we'll see. If it was really as bad as the reports indicated, they definitely should cut ties. So I'm interested to know how true that story was. And then the other thing is, I think that they can still give it another shot with this team. They didn't have LeVert in the play-in. They didn't have T.J. Warren. You got Brogdon, Sabonis, Turner. But I think that one of the options that they can maybe look at is trying to flip Turner to maybe a team that needs a center, like what we were talking about, Charlotte. There weren't a lot of suitors for Miles Turner. It didn't seem like earlier last year. However, maybe with one less year in his contract, he becomes more attractive. He's got next season and the year after at $18 million. So he's not like super overpaid. I think that's a decent contract. There's also TJ McConnell, who's a free agent. I think the 2 things that they're missing is, one, a vet leader. Like, who is their veteran voice to help steer the ship, help clear all the noise? I don't see one on that team. I think they're really missing that. And then the second thing is, they have a bunch of good players who are on decent contracts, but they don't really have any promising rookies on the come up. Someone that can kind of grow into that next stud. And with Denver, it was like, well, when Michael Porter Jr. comes into his zone, we're going to go up a level. And you also had that trade chip. Like, if we really wanted to flip this, we could flip him for a stud. Indiana doesn't have that. And so I think it's going to be really difficult for them to go up another level. And I think that kind of makes it a little bit difficult, the spot they're in.
For sure. There's a lot of turmoil on the Pacers side. And one team that was actually on the verge of falling into a trap like that, I think, honestly, was the Atlanta Hawks this season. But, their story was completely different. They hit another level. They turned it around, and they found another gear, which got them into the playoffs here against the New York Knicks. Now, in our time right now, as we're recording this game just ended. The New York Knicks took game 2, split the series between the Hawks. This series is incredible. And one kind of topic I keep hearing around Twitter was Trae Young's potential. And now this is where it gets interesting. Somebody had asked the question, they put a poll on Twitter, is Trae Young's ceiling higher than Damian Lillard's currently, like prime Damian Lillard? I said no. I mean, honestly, like, if we're talking about Damian Lillard at his peak, probably a top, 7, 8 player in this league overall. All NBA first, second team type guy. So I don't know. I mean, Trae Young, that's a lofty ceiling to hit if he's going to be better than Damian Lillard at his peak. So that's how I feel about that. But this is a major talking point I wanted to discuss with you guys in this series is how far can Trae Young take this team? What can he do? He couldn't quite get it done tonight, kind of bring them over the hump. But overall, this is a fascinating storyline to watch because this is his first playoff outing. And he finally gets a chance to be a part of a winning team in a winning environment. No more empty numbers, things like that. But he still gets a lot of hate because he draws the fouls. The New York mayor hates his guts. And as we saw before, and New York hates his guts. But I think it's fascinating theater, him being the villain and kind of just, putting this, you're really taking this personally and going out there and making things happen. So, if we're talking about predictions for this series, Neil, I want to start with you. How do you feel this series is going to go ultimately? And can Trae Young really kind of bring the Hawks over the hump in this series against a team that's really locked in defensively and seemed to have his number down in the second half tonight?
Yeah, you know what? It's impressive seeing what Trae Young's been able to do because for his short career, all he's received is so much hate about all the things that he can't do, all the things that he doesn't do well. Hey, you're not Steph Curry. Stop shooting these like 40-footers, these half-court shots. You're not Damian Lillard. Terrible on defense. All these things. What's it going to be like in the playoffs? He's averaging 31 points and 8.5 assists on basically 50% shooting from the field, 50% shooting from three. His numbers are ridiculously impressive, and he had that game winner in game one as well. So I'm happy to see what he's been able to do. It's easy to root for a guy like that. And to be honest, they've looked like the better team in both games. New York came back in the second half and ended up winning. But there's two reasons that I'm going to pick New York in 7. And one is because of Julius Randle. Julius Randle in the regular season averaged 37 points a game in the 3 games that these two teams played together. New York won all 3. He averaged 37 points. He's averaging 15 points a game right now. So there is definitely another level of Julius Randle we haven't seen yet. And then the second reason I'm choosing New York is Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose is playing amazing. And finally, Tibbs just fully committed to him in the second half and just said, like, man, you're staying on. I think Derrick Rose is the key to that team as well. So I'll go with Knicks in 7.
Okay.
So I went into this series thinking it just comes down to Trae Young. I think he could win them the series. I also thought he could lose them the series. And so far, like you guys have touched on, he's been that it factor for Atlanta. I have the Hawks in 6. I think they're going to hit another gear when they head back to Atlanta and really kind of stretch the Knicks thin. I think they have just too much talent in the starting lineup and, throughout the roster to kind of keep it as close to it as it is right now. Julius Randle doesn't have the nearly as much burn as in the playoffs as some of the other guys that Atlanta has. Granted, Trae Young is also a novice in the playoffs, but I just feel like their veterans are a little more battle tested. A guy like Danilo Gallinari, I think, has been huge for them. Not nearly as much on the court as maybe also off the court, getting them prepared, showing the young Bucks how to get down in the postseason. And I think that their skills are really going to come to life, like I said, when they head back to Atlanta.
I'm going to split the difference here, guys. I have the Hawks in 7. So I have a similar amount of games as Anil and Oliver. We have the same team winning. So I love how we're kind of all in, different categories there. That's awesome. But yeah, I think this is going to be a great series. I think, any way it goes, they're all going to be highly contested games. I love the throwback vibe. I mean, these are not going to be teams that are going to put up like 120 plus every game. I think it's going to be more of a grinded out old school feel. So I love that for sure. Second series here that I think is worth touching on, Blazers and Nuggets. So the main kind of point, I think, in this series, it comes down to Nikola Jokic. I mean, likely MVP winner for the season. With Jamal Murray being out, does he have enough around him to make this possible? Specifically on defense, I think it's worth noting that, in the backcourt, they're lacking in the defensive department going up against CJ and Dame. It's really difficult to contain those guys, but they do have Aaron Gordon. They do have Michael Porter. So I think if they can just muster up enough offense, they might be able to kind of outscore their way into a victory and just really give themselves a chance to win this series. So I think there's a lot at stake for both teams, but I think, honestly, I think it's more of a kind of do or die for Portland. I mean, this could be the end of an era if this series goes south for them. So I think there's a lot on their shoulders. Oliver, start us off, man. How do you feel this series is going to go down the stretch?
I think it'll start pulling towards Denver's way. I think the overall roster is a little more built for a better playoff run, despite not having Jamal Murray. Aaron Gordon, I think, will be a huge X factor for them. I anticipate that they'll start getting him a little more involved, and we could see more explosive games out of him in the series moving forward. So yeah, I've got Denver in 6. I think they'll turn it up a notch, and the Blazers, they don't really strike me as a team with a real true identity, similar to the way Denver has. So I think that'll kind of get exposed a little bit as the games go on, and ultimately Denver will come out on top.
Okay.
So for me, I think it's going to come down to who is the best player in the series. Is it Damian Lillard, who's being absolutely amazing, or is it Jokic, who's been really, really, really good? In game 2, he was amazing. In game 1, he was okay. But I think that's going to be the difference. In game 1, Jokic was a -13 in terms of plus minus. In game 2, he was a plus 12 in terms of plus minus. That's a 25-point swing. So I really think, and we know that Denver will come and go based on how good is Nikola Jokic. When you look at last year's starting lineup in the playoffs for the Nuggets and this year's starting lineup in the playoffs for the Nuggets, every single starter is different except Jokic. It's pretty crazy when you think about a team that you think is pretty consistent or like pretty similar to last year. It's actually very different.
Yeah.
Jokic right now, he's averaging 36 points, 12 rebounds. He shot 15 of 20 shooting in game 2, just absolutely torched them. But he's only averaging 3 assists. In game 1, he had 1 assist, and in game 2, he had 5 assists. So I expect that to change. It needs to change because he's got to set up some of those guys. And also Damian Lillard right now, he's shooting 14 of 28 from 3-point range. 50% on 28 attempts is pretty crazy. Obviously, he went off last game. I expect that to kind of cool off. He's probably going to have he's due for a bad game, I assume. The way that Jokic gets his points versus the way that Dame gets his points, Jokic is probably going to be more consistent because they're closer to the basket. So for that, I got Denver in 7.
Okay. I want to go against the grain here, guys. I'm going to pick Portland in this series. I think it kind of caters to their play style a little bit. Denver is not a team that's going to kind of grind it out and give them problems defensively. I think a bad matchup for Portland would be somebody like the Lakers that we saw last season. A lot of length, a lot of grit, out-muscled. I think they're going to Portland doesn't have to worry about that in this series, and the guards, they're going to have their way. Campazzo, Monte Morris, great players, but I think they're a little bit lacking in the backcourt, and that kind of opens the door for Portland to really assert himself with their main backcourt players. So I'll go Portland. I can't remember if I had 6 or 7, but I definitely had Portland in this series, and I'll go with Dame Dalla. I'll see. I'll just kind of trust him down the stretch, and I think he can get it done, without having a guy like Jamal Murray to kind of trade baskets with him in the backcourt. And I think that Portland's improved front court also kind of gives them another added dimension that they didn't have last season. So we'll see how that goes. I love that series for sure. Last 2 here, we can kind of hit real quick here. This series, I wish we could spend more time on, but it's been fascinating because Luka's arrival. it's been incredible. And guys, we've talked about the Clippers in our group chat before, just how much this is going to be like a do or die for them. Anil, I recall you saying last night, like, where the hell does this team go if they lose this series? Like, what do you do if you kind of blow it in, you can't get past the Mavericks here? So honestly, I have no idea. You mentioned it earlier, capped out Marcus Morris. I mean, the whole deal is just crazy to think about. And it's not the same story. What I mentioned last night to the group was it's something different. So last year, it's like Kawhi and PG just came up short in Game 7. They were both terrible. Doc Rivers' rotations were terrible. This year, it's like, well, you got Lou, you got Ty Lue as the coach. You have improved rotations. You don't have Montrezl Harrell anymore. Kawhi and PG are playing pretty well, but you still can't get the job done because the defense is lacking. So, just to kind of go out there and give my pick real quick, I had the Clippers in 6 prior to this whole breakdown happening, but it doesn't look so great now. I still have.
It could still happen. It could still happen.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would say it's over, but it's not looking good. It's not looking good. So like, what did you guys have before this whole implosion went down? I will say
that's a good way to position it, because before I would probably have said Clippers in like 5.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing. But I haven't jumped off the bandwagon just yet. I still think they can pull it off. I personally, in a playoff series, I would rather have a defensive deficiency than an offensive deficiency. Offensive deficiency, offense, at this level comes really natural to these players. They're the most elite basketball players in the world. They've been playing for most of their lives. Being on the offensive end is second nature to them. And if you're falling short at that level where it's way more instinctual, then I can see that being a bigger hurdle to get over and to kind of have to manually, start going in and teaching guys things, this late in the season. Whereas on the defensive end, it's just super subtle changes that you could make schematically that I think go a long way. And, I think the Clippers have the coaching staff and the ability to pay attention to the details to tighten that up as they head to Dallas.
Nice. Mm-hmm. So I think we're kind of all in agreement that, the series definitely isn't over, but the signs aren't great. And I'm really not sure where you go from here if this doesn't work out. Kawhi is, potentially coming up on free agency. He's already being rumored to New York, Miami, all the big markets. So we're going to have to see how that goes. But man, I really feel for the Clippers right now. I mean, they just cannot get a break. They have all the talent in the world, but they just, keep on hitting roadblocks, it seems like.
In Game 2, Paul George and Kawhi, they scored 69 points on 60% shooting. And the team as a whole, shot 54% from the field and just under 40% from 3.
Wow.
And you still lost.
That's hard to lose like that.
You can't have a better offensive performance. And they shot 90% on 20 free throws. So, like, the offense was amazing.
Yeah.
But what was the hell was their game plan on defense? Luka went off. The others went off. They shot great from 3. Dallas, 53% from 3. They shot great from 2, 63% from 2. They got to the free throw line 4 more times. So what did they stop? They literally stopped nothing. They were just trying to go offense versus offense. But you claim to have all these great individual defenders, Paul George and Patrick Beverley and Kawhi Leonard. I'm not buying their defense. Their defense is looked trash so far. I think if Dallas wins Game 3, that it's going to be a sweep. But if not, then I'm going Dallas in 6. Either way, I got Dallas, but I think that they won't even be able to get a gentleman's sweep if they lose next game, because I think that mentally they're just going to fall apart.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. So this is do or die for the Clippers. I think this is definitely, this is it for them. I didn't think it happened this early, but here we are. One last series, guys. This is really a fascinating one as well. It's really unfortunate what happened to Chris Paul. His injury is definitely kind of taken the wind out of the sails for the Suns a little bit. But nonetheless, I mean, this is really the coming out party for Phoenix. They really earned this after years of toiling away. And, it's going to be fascinating to see how they manage that injury. Shout out to Cameron Payne. Met him at Summer League 2 years ago, got his autograph. So, I've been rooting for him ever since when he was on the Summer League team for the Mavericks. He's been a revelation for them in this series, kind of taking over the primary playmaking duties. But I'm just glad that the Lakers came out here and really asserted themselves physically because they still have the size. They still have the talent, advantage over this team if everybody's healthy. So I'm just curious to see if, LeBron could kind of muster up a little bit more. I know he's still not 100%, but Davis really came out here and just proved that he's the kind of all-NBA, all-star type player that we've known him to be, especially coming off of that bubble run last year. So when we're looking at predictions, I picked the Lakers. I think they can have enough to pull this out. I don't think it's going to be a quick series. I think they're going to have to fight for everything, but I can't bet against LeBron and AD in these big moments. And even Drummond is coming along. So if they get that supplemental help from those other guys, I think it's definitely going to be in the Lakers' favor. But you guys, how are you guys feeling about that? And Neil, do you have any thoughts about how this might go in the light of CP3's injury?
Yeah, so obviously it sucks, man. I feel like CP3 is cursed. He's had so many good teams. He's had so many good runs in the playoffs, and it just feels like something happened somewhere. They're up 3. They're up 3-2 against Golden State. He gets that injury, and it's like, oh, we're not going to the finals. And then now they looked so good in Game 1, but they unfortunately they can't do it without Chris Paul. I think that if they won this series, they would go to the finals because with the Clippers looking how they do, Denver is banged up, Utah's losing to Memphis. Who would have stopped Phoenix if Phoenix got through the Lakers? So I think that they could have gotten all the way to the finals, but if Chris Paul is not, let's just say at least 75%, then I think that they're going to lose. But if Chris Paul can get it together, then I think that Phoenix could still win. Even if he's not himself next game, fine, go down 2-1. I still would pick Phoenix to win this series because I don't think that LeBron looked great. He looks like a shell of himself. AD woke up in Game 2, which was nice. And I like that Frank Vogel took the risk of keeping him in with 2 fouls. I don't know how he didn't get called for a flagrant 2 when he kicked Crowder in the nuts. That probably should have been a flagrant 2. But on the Phoenix side, Cameron Payne, he used to be a backup dancer to Russell Westbrook. And, man, this guy is making a name for himself. 19 points, 7 assists last game. Like, I think if Chris Paul just missed that game or even if he misses some of the next game, it gives Cameron Payne some shine, and he deserves it. So I'm kind of happy for him. But I'm still going to go Phoenix in 7 because I think that Chris Paul will be able to give him enough.
All right, Oliver, break the tie here, man. I got Lakers in 7, Suns in 7. What you feeling?
I've got Lakers in 6.
Oh, okay.
I think that Chris Paul injury is absolutely devastating. He's just arguably the best floor general there ever is, and if you don't have him on the floor, you lose a whole lot. I mean, you look what happened in Oklahoma City where he basically made something out of nothing, and him not being on the floor with that team is absolutely devastating. And also, I can't bet against LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like, it's just like the point that you made, Aaron. Like, how do you do that? In the first round at least.
Good question.
How do you do? Like, maybe as we get down the road, we could talk about, okay, LeBron's not fully there. He doesn't have the same downhill speed, but in the first round, like, I can't remember the last time he lost a first round series.
Don't think it's ever happened in his career. So yeah, I mean, I think this series is going to be. I think it's one of the most exciting because LeBron versus CP3. I think we've been waiting for that for their entire careers. It's not how we envision it. They're both banged up, but I think nevertheless, we're looking at 2 of the best basketball minds to ever play this game. So there you have it, guys. Those are our predictions. Those are the series. that we're really looking at. There's 4 other series that are pretty interesting, but I mean, some of those are going to be sweeps in 5 games. So, those are what they are. But nevertheless, great discussion here, guys. I really appreciate your time and really being here to kind of talk about the play-in games, the play-in teams, and then the playoffs. So, guys, if you're watching this or you're listening to this podcast, be sure to check out our website. That's going to be notradeclause.com. We have a bunch of resources available for you guys. As we get into the offseason, the draft, we're going to be even ramping up more of our content, coming up here. So, of course, we have the draft odds just updated. We have the future draft picks, cap sheets for all the teams, things like that. Be sure to check us out. Our social media account is always up and running. If you're watching us on Twitter, Instagram account, those are also where we post a lot of content. We have graphics coming up. So whatever you guys can think of when it comes to the NBA and these teams kind of running their operations, we have it covered for you guys. So thanks so much for joining us on this podcast. We definitely have more episodes coming up here as we ramp up going into the playoffs and the off season. And we look forward to having you guys on our future installments as we bring in some special guests and continue to kind of pump out this content and just have a good time talking about ball. So we'll catch you guys in the next episode. And thanks again to my guys here for joining me on this one, and enjoy this playoff run. We'll see you on the next podcast. So take care, everybody.
Yes, sir.